Okay, I'm sitting here with Leo Salit. It is December 20th, 2007. We're going to be discussing his military career, which was extensive. So, Mr. Salit, first tell me, where were you born and what year were you born?
Born in April 16, 1922 in Misericordia Hospital in Manhattan, New York.
So you're a true Manhattan then.
A true New Yorker. We moved from there. We moved to live in the Bronx for many, many years. And there went to school in the Bronx, developed from there. Primarily went to a Townsend Harris High School, which was a prep school for college in the city of New York. Mm-hmm. So basically I can get to college. Of course, we did not have any money and not able to do this. It was also a 3-year high school versus 4-year. It was 1938. I got into the College of City of New York in the course of electrical engineering. This was up in Manhattan. Take trolley cars going from South Bronx. We transfers 5 cents. We transfers to go to the South Bronx, to go to Manhattan, to go to school. In 1941, November, things was kind of hot. Things were going in Europe. There were a lot of ships being sunk, a lot of things that were happening. In November 1941, I took a test to be a junior engineering draftsman with several hundred people. I was fortunate. I got the job. I was accepted for it, and I was to report to work on December 8th, which was a Monday, and December 7th, Pearl Harbor. So things changed. So I was working at the Brooklyn Navy Yard when the induction was at a very high rate. I was eligible for induction into the service, into the armed forces, but I was I was exempt, primarily because I was doing work related to military work. My function in the Brooklyn Navy Yard was to make drawings for installation of highly classified radar and sonar equipment in ships, all kinds of ships. My job was to go down, knowing the specifications or learning the specifications for this equipment. I would go down to ships when they came in for retrofit. And I would basically go down into the ships, take measurements, make assurances that when the ship got to the point for repair or work, that everything was ready and available to be done. So we went out. Sometimes the ship came into the yard. Sometimes I went out in the tugboat to the ship before it got in. Sometimes I was out in the tugboat for like a day or two working on the ship. I worked on cruisers, battleships, minesweepers, everything, including PT boats at that time. I remember going out one time onto a cruiser and we were bringing in some German prisoners. And we got to remember at that time everything was rationed. Food was rationed, gas was rationed, and things were kind of tight back home. It was a time that nobody complained. Everybody was very patriotic at that time. I had lunch with the German prisoners. They ate better than we did. I was a little bit ticked off at that. But it was interesting the way but that's a side point. That's beside the point. At any rate, I worked in the Navy Yard, and I was promoted several times. My initial salary was $1,440 a year. That was up to all the way up to $1,800 a year. At that time, my father was a whole family of 5 supported on $2,000 a year, and even less than that. So I had left day school. I was going back to school at night because I had accumulated about 3/4 of the credits needed for graduation. But anyway, I was ready for induction. There was a time they could not hold me back. I had to apply to get into the armed forces, to be released, to be inducted. Okay, I actually got papers saying they refused it, but anyway, they could not refuse it at the time I was going to be inducted. They indicated sometime in December I was going to go in. So I went on my own and tried to get into different services, different programs to be an officer. the SV6 program, V7, and I could not hear. I can't hear in my right ear, and at that time, I couldn't pass. They wouldn't accept me. I found out about this EDDI program. The EDDI program was primarily a training program for military personnel on classified equipment, radar, sonar. This was the equipment that was being updated on all the ships and airplanes and what have you that were going on at that time. And they were like a couple of days separation, and I was accepted into the EDDI program. So basically I was enlisted, then I got induction papers. The induction papers were set aside, and I went up to boot camp, and from there I went through the different schools, the levels of school on the EDDI program. One of the things I remember is you went to different schools. You went to pre-radio, radio, and then the higher grade. At the middle grade, it was down in Washington. And at that time, if you got a good grade, you were supposed to be assigned to a base that you wanted. I wanted to go to Washington because I wanted to be close to home. They sent me to Chicago. I was the top man in the class. I got this big thing that says 97-something%. Top man, they sent me to Chicago. Oh, I was so damn mad. B was there at the time, and I just I bowed to the commanding officer. He wasn't too happy. But anyway, what I found out later, I went through the schools, the different grades of school, and when I got through with the 10th grade, I was stationed in Chicago. Incidentally, Chicago was wonderful as far as personnel, military work is concerned. As far as the people are concerned, they were great. You could drive anywhere, fly, go on trains, buses, dinners, and anything, no charge. At any rate, I finished the school, and then you made a listing of where you wanted to go. I said, put down all kinds of ships. I put down PT boats, cruisers, anything, submarines. They kept me there. I became an instructor. I had the experience with the equipment, and I knew all the equipment. I was pretty good at it. Number one, I had the educational background. So I was then assigned the last part of my service. I was an instructor at Navy Pier.
And what
in
year was
Chicago.
that?
That was 1945. I think 1945 I went through there. Yeah, graduated 45, January 45 to February 46. I taught radar jamming, countermeasures, and radar repeaters. Okay? All right, then I get out, and I said, while I was going to the Navy Pier, while I was going through school, I got some night classes at the Illinois Institute of Technology, and I took some classes and got credit for them, and I tried to use that credit to get my degree, but I was so close to it. They would not accept it. I had to go back. I got out of the service. I went back to school for 6 months. Incidentally, while I was in the Navy Yard, I got married. Okay, I think it was 1943, June 43, where'd she go? In 1943, we got married. I remember it very close because the day I got married, I had to work. We could not get the day off.
Oh my.
Things were a little bit different. In 1946, I went back to school for 6 months and got my degree. I was looking for jobs, and I got a job after that for installing jukeboxes. Okay, this was in phonograph equipment for Atlantic New York Corporation. I think this was down on the west side of Manhattan. And I rode around the Jeep, and what I was doing was fixing equipment, installing equipment, designing audio systems. And I go around to different bars and restaurants and what have you and check things out. And I would get a tip every place you went. You go to a bar, you get a drink. So after close to a year of that, I said, stop that, because I'm going to be a drunk. You got to figure you're going to be a drunk at that time. So I left there and I got a job at the Radio Marine Corporation of America. That was, Radio Marine was down on the lower, the west side, can't remember the name of the street. At any rate, what they did there was test radar equipment on ships, and mostly commercial ships. But what we did was build radar, test them, install them, and what have you. And also they did some work on the RAN equipment, and that's the direction finding equipment. and stayed there for a while. And back in 1951, I went and got a job at the Bureau of Aeronautics at Grumman Aircraft. Now, Bureau of Aeronautics is the government connection to the military branch at Grumman. What we did there, I was the electrical engineer at that time. I had to sign off on all the electrical drawings on the planes that were going through. I did not design the equipped planes. They handed me drawings. I checked the drawings to see if that's what was on that airplane, basically to make sure that they met the specifications, and I had stamp my name on it.
Mhm.
So hundreds of drawings have my name on it for a couple of ships at that time, the A2F, the W2 airplane. From there, I went to, this is 1951, I went and took a job in, this is back in Special Devices Center in Port Washington, New York. Special Devices Center is the place where they design the training equipment for the military. This was all types of equipment, sonar, radar, any kind of electric equipment. What they were was all the procurement offices for that. And I was assigned to some specific work with some sonar equipment. What we did was, we got a specification, a requirement from the military. We wrote a specification. We went with that specification out for contracts to different people. We followed through and signed a contract to some people, and what we did there was, so I was assigned work on building a sonar trainer. Now, I don't know if you know anything about sonobuoys or tracking submarines. Sonobuoys are devices when you're in an airplane or on a ship. We throw these buoys into the ocean, and what they are listening devices, directional listening devices. So, for example, if I'm in an airplane, I drop sonobuoys around where I think the the submarine is. And by triangulating that information, I estimate this is where the sub is, and we can drop depth bombs on this. All right. I helped develop and also helped them with the design of that. I got a special commendation at that time for that. Okay, so also, what we did also was interesting, was go out into the field and find out how this worked. And I went out in planes, we went out, I was out on a blimp at one time. And that's a very interesting experience. The blimp that we went on, I don't know if you know anything about blimps. Blimp doesn't land by itself. It has ropes that go down, and they got to catch the ropes and pull it down as they pull it close. The blimp I was in is very bare bones. You have like an oven and a stove, a chair on one side and a toilet on the other. In the front was a big plastic bubble. You could sit in the bubble, and right in front of the guys who were piloting it, and you're like sitting in space. There's a wide open. It was fascinating. It was beautiful. Anyway, we had another fellow and myself. We went down. We were going to go with the blimp. We were going to go out with a Coast Guard plane to track the sub. The idea was to get the sounds that the sub makes, so I can relate that to the sonobuoy trainer that we were making. Well, while we were out there, a hurricane came in. Okay, the plane made it back. We could not. We had to go ride up coast. We went all the way up coast to Virginia Beach in a blimp. There's no parachutes on the blimp. Okay, the only one that has a parachute is the captain, or was it mechanic, chief mechanic on there. He's supposed to be able to get down close enough, get down, get people together so they grab the ropes and pull the blimp in. That's the way the blimps landed. Anyway, to shorten this up, about 3 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the morning, we came back to base. We were supposed to have been back like 8, 9 o'clock the night before. We got down to base, okay, and we got off the plane. By that time, I was kind of green. And they asked, we're ready for the next flight. And we were scheduled every day. We were going to go up. And the guy came to me and he says, "Are you ready for a briefing on the next flight?" I was a civilian at the time. I told him to go somewhere. But we went up in planes. We went up in blimps, and we checked out the trainers. And to me, it was a great experience with working with the military. All right. From there, these are basically all technical stuff, all related to the military. Next job was an interesting one. It was at Colesman Instrument Corporation. Colesman at that time was building basic instruments, plus they were working on an Astro tracker. Now, the basis for most of my work that's been going on is a reference platform. You got to picture something that's going to shoot a gun in space, or it's going to have a missile that's floating in space. They got to have a reference. The reference is an inertial platform or some platform. All right. What this is basically a combination of sensors that once you set up a reference, if you're going to fly, for example, move in any direction, it'll sense the amount of that movement in that direction and tell you where you are. Basically, you're tracking yourself and gives you data so that you can get measurements. Now, what they were doing at that time, they wanted to get stuff that related to missiles. Now, this will work into what I worked on later. And what they did there was wanted to work on tracking stars. You're going to shoot a missile, and as the missile goes up in space at a certain phase, and you're going to, based on knowledge of the stars and where you are based on this inertial system, you could guide that missile. Okay? Now that's the basis for a lot of the work that I'm going to talk to you about in a few minutes. But Colesman at that time worked on a system that was going on a bomber, a B-58 bomber system. And what happened there was I worked on part of the development. I was not the original developer. I got on after it was being developed. I was part of the test team. We tested this. We go up on roofs tracking stars. We go back and we went to the Sperry was the one that was doing the basic equipment on the airplane, the B-58. So we were working with Sperry on this. So that's when I started working on stuff related to star tracking and what have you. From there, I went on to Grumman.
And what year was that?
This is 1958. I went in Colesman from June 53 to November 58. I went to Grumman in Bethpage in December 58. And there I worked with, I was the head of the avionics team integrating a system. Now the system we worked on is called an E2A or W2F. Okay, this airplane has a big dome on it, it's a rotodome. And basically what this does is goes up at altitude, and it has a pilot and a co-pilot. It has a bay with radar equipment and 3 stations with Navy personnel. And they can track airplanes. They go up at altitude, and what they do is control an airspace. They can control where flights are going to go for bombing runs. They can control where the planes are with related coming back to an aircraft carrier. And this was a complete system. It was a radar, computers, inertial equipment, TACAN, intercept control, just general communication. And I was part of the initial team integrating that equipment. I did not design the equipment. The equipment was signed out to people like Litton, to General Electric, Download Victor, and what have you. But Grumman was responsible for integrating all this stuff. So this stuff was being put together by me, under a team under me on this. I was the interface with some of the contractors. I was the guy responsible for having it happen in the house. I was the head of the flight test team. Now this is a complete new story in itself. This is a new airplane. The plane had not, this is the first one built. And the first plane built, you got to realize it's 5 positions on this plane for people. When the first plane goes up, the test pilot goes up with the first plane. Okay, he's got all this equipment working, but he's the only one in the plane. He goes up for the first time. He's up there for 20 minutes. He gives us a report on how the equipment's working in the back of the plane. I have a tremendous amount of respect for these test pilots. They know everything that's on the plane, what have you. Anyway, the purpose of telling you this is that I went many times with a plane, this plane, other planes, up there for test flights for all the equipment. We go out in Bethpage. Now the family lived in nearby, in Plainview, which was not far from there. And we go up in an airplane, and I'd be walking around the plane looking at the equipment, the pilot and the co-pilot. Usually when I went up in a test flight, there was nobody else in the back, just myself for the positions. And I tell you, hey Tommy, I see red fluid out in the window here. The hydraulic system goes. Okay, we go back. I remember one time went out, and we're out there, and we got parachutes laying on the deck. I kicked one of them, and I opened one up. So I go, Tommy, we got a problem. What happened? I tell him, that's no problem, it's yours. But it was an adventure. It was a tremendous knowledge about all these different types of equipment. I learned airplanes. I learned integration of equipment in this outfit. I had a tremendous amount of experience on that, and also learning airplanes. The airplane business is a crazy one. Then from there we went to, that lasted on that from till February '62. In '62 I decided, we were living out in Long Island at that time. Pardon me. Then we moved out, in '62 they took a job in Kierfat. At that time it was just Kierfat Division. Okay, at that time it was not Singer. It changed its name later to Singer, and then it went to General Precision, but it was always a Kierfat division. Now here was a company that was involved with modernization, integration of platforms. I remember when I talked to you about having a reference, this inertial reference, so that you have a reference from a sheet, or try to sight a star, for example. I got to know where I am in order to be able to sight a star and then use that for control. So this company was involved with developing the sensors. This company was involved with hardening. When I say hardening, designing equipment that would be able to withstand a nuclear environment. So we're talking about developing equipment, developing materials, and what have you. And at the time, I'm not going to go through all of these. There's a lot of things I went through. Going backwards, okay, the last job I worked on, I'll jump ahead. I left that company in 1988. I retired at that time. Okay, the reason I retired was the company was being split up into different places, and I had an opportunity. I was 67 at the time. I figured it was time for me to get out. The last job I worked in was the Mark 48 ADCAP. Mark 48 is a torpedo that's used by the Navy. The Navy is a standard heavyweight torpedo. I don't know if you ever saw pictures of some of these submarines. Primarily, it's got a bunch of torpedoes, some place for these guys to sleep, place for the guys to eat, and the idea is using torpedoes. That's the main weapon at that time. The Mark 48 was becoming extinct. Number one, it had to be hardened. Number one, it had to be miniaturized. Number two, it had to be increased in accuracy. And what they did was redesign it, and they modernized it. The Mark 48 was being modernized, and we had the job of establishing, again, a reference in that torpedo, in that same body, because we had to be able to put them in the same space as the other ones. That was the last job I worked on. Before that, I worked on a Pershing program. Not a Pershing, I think underneath there is, you see this. Okay. Pershing is a missile program, it's a ballistic missile program that worked off of mobile trackers, mobile trucks, if you will. Okay, and they were stationed in Germany, and they were set up as a ballistic defense against Russia. Now, the Pershing was an old system. To give you an idea, I went out there into Germany and looked at some of the old equipment, and they're still using radio tubes. Okay, and I went in. We talked to some of the people at the stations, and they asked him how is it working, and he goes over the table and he bangs on the table and then everything went to hell. He said, "This stuff is extinct." So, anyway, to make a long story short, again, what it was initially was a plain inertial system. What the initial missile was, you shoot the missile up, it goes into a trajectory that you plan ahead of time and goes off the target. Now what they've done is put a system in. where you start off that way with the inertial system, and then it terminates with a radar system. So what you're ending up with something a lot more accurate with a lot more range. And that was the system I worked on that. And when I say, when I work on these, we design it, we build it, you go through what you call a design review with the customer. The customer is the Air Force, it's the Navy, it's SAMSO, the Special Missile Defense System. All these people are involved with development of equipment for the military. And you demonstrate what you've got, then you build sample systems, you test them, and these got to the point where delivery, this was delivered to Martin Marietta at that time. This was pretty big program at that time. There was a lot of money, a lot of priority into this, and it was kind of exciting. Before that, we built and had several programs on maneuverable reentry systems. Now, your Minuteman program, some of these old missiles with great big systems that are in silos, okay, they have what they call reentry systems, reentry things. In other words, you have a missile that goes off, and then in the nose cone, you've got a bunch of missiles. You've got a bunch of weapons in there. And they go up to 10 systems that are built up in there. So you've got to miniaturize everything that you're doing. It's also to the point where they're going to be exposed to the maximum hardening. In other words, as far as exposure is concerned to nuclear environment and what have you. So they have to be accurate, and they have to be able to withstand the shock, and they have to be small. So I was involved with the development of what they call the maneuverable reentry vehicles. And we had a demonstration of these. The testing of some of these was out at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. And what we were doing was competing with other companies and building this stuff. And I was chosen to be the director of test activities down at Holloman. And it was all the test activities that a company had down there, but the primary one was with the maneuverable reentry systems. So this, again, is sort of the basis for all these latest development in missile systems. Okay, so these are things that were going on at that time. You also go through with different reentry evasive maneuvers. Some of these not just go in, they also go into another mode. For example, in one of the systems, it has a mapping system, a radar mapping system that ties in to all of this. Another thing that you get into is maneuvering. In other words, not only does it have to launch another sub-missile, if you want to call, but it has to be able to maneuver. In other words, it'll go through different gyrations so it can evade being knocked out. While I was in Holloman, they suddenly had an emergency at one of the divisions in New York. General Precision Laboratories, where they made Doppler Systems. Doppler Systems is a navigation system that was used in airplanes and different equipment, ships, airplanes mostly. And they needed a program manager. By that time, I think I was a little bit egotistical here, but by the time they needed somebody that's going to get something done. So I was assigned there and also worked on the GPL Doppler systems for new airplanes. In between all of these things, I worked on proposals. We worked on proposals. Every time some new program came in, we had to get the proposals written to see if we get new business. That was all part of the business venture. So all the time from 1962 to October of '88, that was my experience with missile systems. I feel, and again, I'm proud of what I did. I got commendations from the Navy. I've got commendations at almost every phase of the program. Like I said, I went through some of my papers in here and found out some of the things that I got I didn't realize on here. So I'm kind of proud of what I did, and I think I made a contribution to the military effort.
Definitely.
I don't know if that answers your questions or not.
Oh, yes, definitely. Now, when you're developing all these missile systems and like it's beyond my thinking, it was primarily to defeat the Russians for the
It
Cold
was
War.
Cold War.
Yeah, the Soviets.
It's the Cold War time.
And I've just wondered how did you feel at that time about the Soviets? Did you? I mean, I know that.
As far as I was concerned, I was doing a job. The Soviet at that time was considered an enemy, okay, and we had to develop the technology. We had to keep, remember Sputnik? I don't know, you were born yet. Okay, all of a sudden the Russians got a spaceship. They got something up there that we couldn't do. Now, primarily, we had the methods of doing it. We had the equipment to do it, except there was an incentive to do it. And this is all of a sudden, hey, we got to beat the Russians. So all of a sudden, we developed a complete program, and we're way ahead of the Russians. We're way ahead of the Russians after a while.
Right.
But the picture at that time was always, we got to beat the Russians. And that was the thing. You got to beat the Russians. And unfortunately, we're starting to get to that again. And that's what the picture was at that time. As far as personally is concerned, I went from job to job primarily for advancement. Like I told you, started off at $14.40. Okay, when I ended there, I was making a fairly decent salary. I retired in '88. Retired primarily, I could have worked longer. As a matter of fact, they didn't want me to go, but I felt at that time I had a heart attack some years before, and I wanted to get out. And the boss said I better get out.
Yeah. So after you retired, what brought you and your wife to Dallas?
Well,
from New York.
We lived in New Jersey. We lived in New Jersey for 1962 to 97. My daughter lived and worked in Colorado, up in the Boulder area. We figured, okay, let's move out there, be close to her. We'd get to the point where we needed some help, we'd have somebody home. Carol was the sculptor. She's the one that developed some of the stuff that you saw here. We lived there. I love the mountains. I love the area. It's something I didn't want to leave. But unfortunately, Carol's husband had to leave his job, and he had to find a job in Pittsburgh. He found a job in Pittsburgh, so they had to move. They didn't sell the house. They kept the place in Colorado because the town that she's in is a base for making all these sculptures that she's built, that designs. So she spends like half a year there. So we decided to come in, in 2004, October. My son is here in Texas. So he said, better come down here. So he lives down here, he has his family here, and he's our support base, primarily.
That's good.
Okay, so we've been here for about 3 years, October.
Do you like Texas? Do you like
It's
Dallas?
interesting. If I had my druthers, I'd rather be in Colorado.
Yeah, I love Colorado as well.
We've always been near the ocean, or we've always been near the mountains, or something, and here, it's interesting. People are different, people are nice, people are friendly and everything, and what have you, and it's not a bad place to live. We got into a gated community. My son works so he can look out his office and see our building over here, so he can check up on us. He has to. But on here, but primarily he wanted us close by. I wanted to make it easier for them too. So.
Have you gotten plugged into the Jewish community here? Or?
I belong to the Jewish War Veterans. I belong to the American Legion also, and not too close. Not too close to them here. They're not. You have to go to the synagogue that my son belongs to. There's a community center down further south from here. We've been there a couple of times to some events there. It is not convenient to us. I don't drive that much lately.
Right. It is pretty far.
So it's become a chore. No, I don't belong to that right now. We have we're both gimpy, and we're just crawling around up on what have you. So we get out, we do our exercise, we got an exercise bike. We try to walk as much as we can in the malls and keep moving.
Sure.
So that's about it.
And do you have any grandchildren?
I have 4 grandchildren. We have 2 of them were here yesterday, mooching lunches from us. And so
Talking about that, would you like some coffee or anything?
No, I'm fine with the water. Yes, thank you.
the 2 boys, how old are they? How old is Heath?
Huh?
Heath is
He's 27.
he's 27 and 25. My granddaughter is in California, in Hollywood, directing plays and what have you. She is 36 already?
37.
37. And I have a grandson in Denver who's involved with doing computer work. And what have you, he is, what is it, 30?
35.
He's 35 already? Well, your kids are getting old.
Do they have any children? Do you have any great-grandchildren? No, not yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet.
Not yet. Everybody's busy.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's different today.
Yes, it is very different. My mother is not happy about it, and there you are. She doesn't have any grandkids. She really wants some. So there. Well, thank you, Mr. Salit. It was,
Okay, thank you for coming.
and I think your story is very important as far as your contribution to the efforts during the Cold War, especially. And I know I've seen that plane
We've seen,
recently on like a National Geographic special on the Ronald Reagan, I believe.
we've taken
So
the
use
kids,
that.
taken the grandkids when they were young, took them down to the ship that was down in Manhattan, was it?
The Enterprise, was it?
The Enterprise, I think it was. We had to show them my airplane.
Yeah.
It was my airplane.
That's very
It's the same
cool.
thing, yeah.
Well, I thank you. So.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
All
no
they
problem.
did is give them